യു എയിൽ വരാനിരിക്കുന്ന കോർപ്പറേറ്റ് നികുതിയും ഇത് സംബന്ധിച്ച മാനദണ്ഡങ്ങളുമാണ് കഴിഞ്ഞ അധ്യായത്തിൽ നാം ചർച്ച ചെയ്തത്. ഈ അധ്യായത്തിൽ നമുക്ക് കോർപ്പറേറ്റ് ടാക്സ് ഏതൊക്കെ വ്യവസായങ്ങളെ എങ്ങനെ ബാധിക്കുന്നു എന്ന് അറിയാം. നമ്മുടെ കൂടെയുള്ളത് ഈ വിഷയത്തിൽ നമ്മോട് സംസാരിക്കുന്നത് MCA ഗൾഫ് ഗ്രൂപ്പ് സീനിയർ പാർട്ട്ണർ ഗിരീഷ് ചന്ദ് സഞ്ജീവ. നമസ്കാരം സർ.
നമസ്കാരം
സാർ, നമ്മൾ കഴിഞ്ഞ അധ്യായത്തിൽ കോർപ്പറേറ്റ് ടാക്സിനെ കുറിച്ചും അതിൻ്റെ ബേസിക് ക്രൈറ്റീരിയാസിനെ കുറിച്ചൊക്കെ സംസാരിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നു. എല്ലാവർക്കും ബിസിനസ് മേഖലയുള്ളവർക്കൊക്കെ ഓരോ മേഖലയെ കുറിച്ചും സംശയമാണ്, ഇതെങ്ങനെ കോർപ്പറേറ്റ് ടാക്സ് ഓരോ മേഖലയും ബാധിക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളത്. ഫസ്റ്റ് ഓഫ് ഓൾ നമുക്ക് ഫ്രീ സോൺ കമ്പനികളിൽ നിന്ന് തുടങ്ങാം. എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഈ ഫ്രീ സോൺ കമ്പനികളിൽ ഇത് എഫക്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത്?
Okay. So I think this is a common question which people have about what is the impact of corporate tax on free zone. See, free zones have been promised basically that they would be kind of no taxation would apply to them. Okay, so the UAE government is keeping up that promise that no taxation would apply, but there are certain criteria as far as free zone is concerned. Okay, now if a free zone is dealing with the within the free zone or other free zones, or it is dealing with outside UAE, then that particular transactions are all basically going to be 0%. So if a free zone is doing only these transactions, okay, now if a free zone has got a branch in the mainland, okay, then in that case the branch in the mainland, whatever transactions are there, that will be at 9%, whereas the free zone transactions will be at 0%. Okay, then when we talk about in terms of the free zone, if it is basically doing transactions with mainland in terms of goods are concerned, as long as the mainland entity is the importer on record, right, then also the free zone related transactions will be treated as 0%. But if the free zone is having transactions within the free zone and also having transactions in the mainland, right, and these are primarily maybe services related and stuff, in that context, the free zone entity, the entire income, whether from mainland or from the free zone, all of them will be subject to 9%. So very important is that for free zone entities to analyze what type of transactions they are having, and so accordingly, because the tax treatment varies according to that. The other important element of free zone entities is when we say the 0% taxation, the entity still needs to kind of file the returns on the annual basis. Okay, also one more condition which has been placed on the free zone entity is that they would need to get their accounts audited. Okay, so there is certain amount of clarity in terms of free zone, but however we still await the law to clearly understand what is the applicability of corporate tax for free zones.
നെക്സ്റ്റ് സെക്ടർ എന്ന് പലർക്കും സംശയമുള്ള ഫോറിൻ ഇൻവെസ്റ്റേഴ്സ്, ഇവരെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് കോർപ്പറേറ്റ് ടാക്സ് ബാധിക്കുന്നത്?
Okay, so this is more in line with the whatever the international taxation applicability is, right? So if you talk about foreign entities, okay, if they are basically just investing in entities within UAE, right, and if they are generating passive income. What is passive income? Passive income is in the form of dividends, in the form of capital gains, in the form of interest. These kind of income would not be subject to corporate tax. But if a foreign entity is actually doing business in the UAE, right, and it leads to something called as a permanent establishment, means where they are doing it on a regular basis. In that context, the foreign entity would be liable for corporate tax in UAE.
സർ, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഈ ഇമ്പോർട്ടിംഗ് എക്സ്പോർട്ടിംഗ് ട്രാൻസാക്ഷനിൽ ഇത് ആപ്ലിക്കബിൾ ആണോ?
So the basically, because like we spoke, corporate tax is a tax on the net income. Okay, it is not primarily on the transactions per se. So importing exporting, it would not impact. Importing exporting would have more impact in the VAT context, right? Whether when you import goods into the country, primarily whether VAT is applicable, or when you export, is VAT applicable. So it's more on the value added tax. But when we talk about corporate tax, importing and exporting would not be impacted, but it would be more the structure of the company. So where is the company? If suppose the company is based in mainland and it is doing exporting of transaction or exporting of goods or exporting of services, it requires to pay corporate tax on all its net income generated, right? But if an entity is based in the free zone and it is doing an importing exporting and it has none of its products are coming into the mainland, then that entity is basically subject to a 0% corporate tax.
കോർപ്പറേറ്റ് ടാക്സ് നിലവിൽ വരുന്നതോടെ എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഡോക്യുമെന്റേഷൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ റെക്കോർഡ് കീപ്പിംഗ് ഇതിലൊക്കെ വലിയൊരു പ്രാധാന്യം വരുന്നു. എന്താണ് സാറിന് അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് പറയാനുള്ളത്?
Yeah, so actually the compliance and documentation, this actually started during the value added tax, which was in 2018, right? So value added tax actually required you to maintain books of accounts. Okay, basically whatever the invoices that you raise, yeah, those have to be in a proper format, right? And even when you get some from the suppliers, the tax invoice, they have to be proper formats and stuff. So that was something which started during the value added tax. But what we have seen in the practice is that people just focused in terms of their sales invoices and possibly in terms of the supplier related invoices, so that they can do a proper submission, right? But maybe the books of accounts, wherever not required, people were not focusing on, right? Now that is the difference which will happen when the corporate tax comes in. When corporate tax comes in, everybody is expected to maintain proper books of accounts, because you are saying that this is my net income, right? How do you prove it? Obviously you'll have to maintain books of accounts, right? You'll have to do the accounting. Okay, similarly, of course, the other elements of the transactions in terms of invoices and all have to be maintained. The other part of it is that we also are talking about the personal related expenses, right? So now that is something which is not allowed, in terms of whenever you are saying my net income is so, right, you can't put your personal expenses and say this is the net income. So that again, the clarity needs to be maintained in terms of how you are segregating between business related expenditure and personal related expenses. So these also will start coming in. The third part of it is when you talk about management, management also is basically basically they would try to put their expenses related to theirs. Okay, so there is a certain element of salaries which will be allowed, but maybe that is something which will have to be very clearly defined.
ഓക്കെ സർ, കോർപ്പറേറ്റ് ടാക്സുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട വിശദമായിട്ടുള്ള ഡീറ്റെയിൽസ് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു എഫക്റ്റീവായി കോമൺ പീപ്പിളിന് എന്തായാലും മനസ്സിലായിട്ടുണ്ടാവും. വളരെ യൂസ്ഫുള്ളായ സെഷനായിരുന്നു. എന്നാൽ ഇൻഫോക്കസിൻ്റെ നമ്മുടെ ഈ സെഗ്മെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ സമയം അവസാനിക്കാറായി. UAE വരാനിരിക്കുന്ന കോർപ്പറേറ്റ് നികുതിയുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട വിശദാംശങ്ങൾ നമ്മോട് പങ്കുവയ്ക്കുകയായിരുന്നു MCA ഗൾഫ് ഗ്രൂപ്പ് സീനിയർ പാർട്ണർ ഗിരീഷ് ചന്ദ് സഞ്ജീവ. മറ്റൊരു സാമ്പത്തിക വിഷയവുമായി അടുത്ത അധ്യായത്തിലൂടെ കാണാം.